Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Politics, and welcome to the Nature of Democracy Part 1, which is where we're going to start our journey through British politics. A reminder that this will make an awful lot more sense if you accompany it with the handout that you should have got in class, and do use this to make notes or questions that you can ask me about later. So, we're going to start off by looking at some of the key terms that you really need to know. Now, we're not going to be able to cover all of these in this particular presentation, but by the end of the section on democracy, you should know what all of these were, or what all of these terms mean. And these are all examined terms, so if you don't know these going into the examination, you will be one step behind the rest of the world. So these are all terms that you need to know, and make sure that you're happy with your definitions of them. Let's start off with the definition of democracy. Now, we can look at the derivation of this word, and we find that it's extremely complex and emotive. It comes from the Greek demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power or strength. So here we see democracy already relating back to the people, and that's one of the key phrases that you need to remember. We're going to pair this all the way back to try to strip democracy of a lot of the values that we associate with it, and just make sure that we understand the raw term itself. So these are the areas we're going to look at when we look at democracy. We're going to look at various structures of democracy. We're going to look at the processes involved in democracy, and then we're going to look at some of the problems that arise with democracy. But that is all in the future. We will come to all of that, or most of that, in a future presentation. Some of it we will cover in this particular presentation. So, here are a few more definitions. Now, we should already have covered these in class. You should remember that power is the ability to effect change. So, if you have the ability to change something, if you can impose your will on something, if you can change a structure, then you have power. Authority is the right to exercise that power. So in other words, it is legitimate power. We'll keep coming back to this idea of legitimacy. Power without authority is bullying. Authority without power is impotence, essentially. So these are two critical definitions, and we're going to bounce them around a bit as we go through the rest of this presentation. So let's have a look at some of the structures that we need to know about. And the first of these is the state and how it is organized. Now, according to Wikipedia, and that's as good a place to start as anywhere, the state is, as it says there, an organized political community living under a single system of government, and that's it. Just learn that. That is the state. Now, what are the various institutions of the state? Well, there are 4 institutions of the state with which you need to be familiar. The first of those is the legislature. Now, the legislature writes law. It does what it says. The legislature, key is in the name, it legislates. We then have the executive. Now, the executive promulgates law, or it puts that law into effect. Finally, we have the judiciary. The judiciary arbitrates the law. The judiciary sits in judgment on the law. I said finally because those are the 3 formal aspects of the state. The 4th is us. We are the citizens. We are bound by the law of that state. But of course, because it's a democracy, power also flows from those citizens to the other institutions of the state. And that really is what we're going to talk about in the rest of this presentation. As it says there, in a democracy, people are considered the sole... you can read it. Okay. So, let's have another look at that. We can look at those 4 parts again and argue that they represent what we call the legal triangle. Now, this is more the other side of the course, that is people in governing the UK, where you need to know what the legislature does, it writes law, what the judiciary does, arbitrates law. Unfortunately, this came snuck in before the other one. What I really want to do is to have that triangle coming in last, but hey, my PowerPoint skills are limited. The executive promulgates law, and then the citizen is bound by the law. However, they are still the source of all political authority because we are living in a democracy. So, these are the 4 main aspects of the state with which you need to be familiar. For what it's worth, and again, this is something that will come up later, everything that happens within this is described by the Constitution. So the Constitution describes the organization of the state, the relationship between the citizen and the state. So it's both a blueprint and a contract. But that is rather for later. Anyway, let's move on. So let's look at how we might choose to organize the state. The most simple structure of government, well, it's kind of when one person does all those critical roles. So we can look at a tyrant or a despot. And this definition came up in 1788, and I've been struggling to improve on it, as has the rest of the world. So we have a tyrant, and the tyrant sits there with all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in their hands. So there we go. King Joffrey there is literally, in many instances, judge, jury, and executioner. He writes the laws, he promulgates the laws, and he then sits in judgment of those laws, and good luck if you displease him. Obviously, we've moved past that. We've moved on to more complex structures relating to the fact that the authority of the state comes from the people, not from the hereditary monarch who can claim his lineage from God. I mean, remember, go back here, where did Geoffrey get his authority from? Well, it wasn't from the people, it was by nature of his birth, and that birth was traced back to the royal right, the divine right of kings, something we dispensed with in this country some time ago. So, we come back to this idea of democracy, the idea that all power flows from the people. Well, the most simple structure, system of government predicated on popular sovereignty is the right way to put it. The most simple structure we can look at is direct democracy, where the same people who are the source of authority are the same people that write the laws. So this is the idea that the people are the people who are the institution who write the laws. Well, it shouldn't really take a huge amount of thought to discover that that is really not a great model. Life is complicated. Perhaps these are things that we should leave to professional politicians, professional legislators. It's also time-consuming, and if everyone's sitting there making laws, then frankly, who's out there gathering the wheat or looking after the cattle? So having a specialized organization to handle law and its implementation and so on is probably quite a good idea. Now, this is a much more complicated idea. If we leave everything down to the if we leave everything to the majority, then if there is a persistent minority, then that is going to be overlooked. So if you think about left-handed people are a minority, and in fact they are subject to the tyranny of the majority because our entire life is organized around right-handed people. Now, you'll know this if you're left-handed. You know, door handles, screw tops, writing. You are subject to the tyranny of the majority. Now, in life, you know, perhaps that's something you have to deal with. But in politics, that's really not something that we can allow to persist. And so we need a mechanism that's going to enable us to get past this tyranny of the majority. Imagine if there was a persistent minority in society, be it ethnic or sex or sexual orientation or hair color. These people could essentially be ganged up on by everybody else. So we need something that gets away from just a raw show of hands to determining what's right for any particular society. Again, we'll go into this in much more detail, but do come to me with questions. You will have questions arising from that. So, let's have a look at representative democracy instead. Now, this is the model that we employ in this country. It's the model that most countries nowadays employ. We have the people. The people are the source of all political authority. So they have the power. And if the slide would advance, there we go. But they grant authority to representatives to exercise that power on their behalf. So we are the source of all power. We hand that power, we grant authority to exercise power to our representatives, and they in turn exercise that power over us. There is an agreement here. There is an agreement between the people and the representatives that sees the people grant authority to exercise power to our representatives, and then they can exercise power over us. So again, as long as you're comfortable with the definitions of authority and power, this should be relatively straightforward. The key thing is that these guys up here have no intrinsic power. They have neither intrinsic power nor intrinsic authority. That is granted to them by us, and in return we get this cycle, this circle, if you will, of power. Key thing again, these guys have neither authority nor power. Power and authority intrinsically reside here. As long as the rules are agreed, then this is perceived to be a legitimate arrangement. The representatives can be said to be operating legitimately, as long as they are operating within the structure that the people dictate. So in this instance, we have an electoral system, we elect our representatives, and they sit there until we decide that, frankly, we've had enough of them, in which case they can't stay. As long as they abide by the terms of that particular agreement, then they are said to be operating with legitimacy. Oh, sorry, I'm not sure what's happened there. Let's move on. The critical question, as I said there, is what does it mean to be legitimate? And anything that is perceived to fulfill its obligations, usually legal but sometimes political, can be said to be legitimate. In this case, the government is legitimate if it has the confidence of Parliament and it meets the term of parliamentary government. Now, these are terms that will be coming up in the second unit, but it's fine to look at them here. The question then becomes, what does that mean for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea? That's North Korea. Is that really a democracy? The German Democratic Republic, that's the former East Germany. So we can see here that the complex notion of democracy can be twisted to suit the needs of an autocratic or a tyrannical state. So we need to fine-tune our definition of what democracy might be. And the way we do that is by expanding our notion of democracy to the idea of choice, accountability, and operating in the interests of the people. So a proper democracy, a Western democracy we might say, is a government that is chosen by the people. It is answerable to the people and it operates in the interests of the people. And immediately it should be clear that the examples I just gave you there in terms of North Korea and the former East Germany would not fit into this model. So we can exclude our so-called communist democracies from this particular structure. That is our Western democracy, a government chosen by the people, operating in the interests of the people and answerable to the people. We can look at that in more detail here. The government chosen by the people, there you go, you can read that. Accountable to the people, you can read that and feel free to pause it and make notes. And finally, operating in the interests of the people, again, you are more than capable of reading that. And that is where we are going to end this particular presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I look forward to answering your questions, and there should be plenty. Come and see me, and we'll pick this one up next lesson.